Hey, what is going on, everybody, and welcome to Fantasia. For today, we're going to be jumping into another session of Epic 7 out today. Got another tier list for you guys. That's right, jumping into this here, we're going to be talking about the 6th anniversary RGB 5-star selectors that we're going to be getting whether you're a new or returning player with this upcoming anniversary update. Now, going into this here, assuming that these selectors work the same as in years past, very recently released units, for example like Frida, will be unavailable to claim. However, we do have to keep in mind that there are also other limited units that were released in the past, as well as collaboration units that will likely not be available here either. I know for sure the collaboration units are not. If for whatever reason that some limited units are going to be available there, then I will include them in their own tier, but for the most part, just assume that limited units are off the table, collaboration units are off the table, units that are really recent like Frida, and any unit that's going to be coming up in the horizon, they will also be unavailable, right? So anyway, let's go ahead and jump to the tiers here. On the left side, you can see there's the must-own category. Now, the must-own category, I'm keeping very, very small. I'm trying to condense it to like the really core units that you're going to need, right, to advance in the game, because a lot of the content, whether it be like PVE like Abyss or Adventure and all those things, can be cleared with various units. You can also get around with substituting 5-star units with 3-star units, and there's also 4-star units that excel in certain niches as well, and we're not ranking every single unit in the game, just the 5 stars that are available on the selector, so please keep that in mind. Right. The next tier that we have here is going to be the PvP and PvE units. I kind of made this kind of mixed category because there's some units that you can invest in early on to carry you through some PvE content, right, through Abyss stages and things like that. That can also, once you beat those stages, double up as a future PvP character for Guild Wars, Arenas, or even RTA. PvP units are mostly exclusively used in PvP. Nothing stops you from using some of these units in PvE content though. I use plenty of PvP units on their PvP builds in PvE content, so that's no problem there. For PvE units, these are the ones that are a bit more niche, right? They kind of are fitting in either into just like expeditions or just Abyss runs. They kind of have their own use, so I'm putting them here because they're a bit more specific in what they're using them for. And then we have Waifus and Husbandos. It's just a nice way of me putting the units that are quite subpar and probably need a buff or something in the future. But if you do like them, go for them. This game is a really generous game, right? As you can see with the anniversary update. So as you play the game for longer, you're gonna get more resources. You're gonna be able to summon more, and you really won't be running into too many roadblocks when it comes to PvE content in this game, right? So there are obviously some endgame PvE content that are more unit based, like unit locked, like for example Hall of Trials. To succeed and get the higher scores, you're probably gonna need to have the specific units and the specific gear in order to clear it. But yeah, aside from that, if you love a character, please don't hesitate to go for it. You have multiple selectors, right? But you can also hold on to the selectors until after you open all of your random 5-star unit books, right? It'd suck if you open the selector to get a unit and then later down the line you get the 5-star book, you open it, and it's the same unit. So I'd recommend just holding on to your selectors until afterwards if possible, and then claiming whatever units you don't have then. Next up, we have the free category. These are going to be units that are accessible through connections or given out from doing special missions and stuff in the game, and so you shouldn't be using your selectors on those. All right, so anyway, moving on, let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to get rid of these unavailable units first, right? So Frida is currently unavailable. So are all the collaborations. So I Giselle, I Ningning, I Karina, and I Winter. So yeah, those collaboration units are not available. Guilty Gear units like Soul, Dizzy, we have Baiken, Elfelt, and Jacko also not available. Full Metal Alchemist, we have Edward Elric, Roy Mustang, Riza Hawkeye, not available. Emilia, Rem, and Rom from ReZero, not available. Slime collaboration with Rimuru, with Milim, with Shuna, we have Benimaru, they're all not available. And then the latest collaboration that we got earlier this year, Overlord with Ainz, we have Albedo and Shaltir, also not available. Okay, so moving on here, we have the free units that you have access to. These are actually really strong units. In fact, if these units were not given out for free, they would be in the must-own category. These two right here, Tamarin and Brig. Tamarin is super, super strong. You want to get her through connections once she's available there. She'll carry you through a bunch of PvE content she used across the board in Abyss missions and expeditions. You can run her in certain hunts as well, like Azimanic, for example, and Katie's. She is just a super versatile, probably the best PvE unit in the entire game. Right, next up we have Brig. Now Brig here has pretty much been the catch-all when it comes to expeditions, right? You can use him in pretty much every single expedition except the Earth one. The Earth one is, well, he's an ice unit, so he kind of struggles there. And he doesn't have AoE, so it's really not his niche. But he covers pretty much every other expedition. I use him in all my expeditions besides Earth, pretty much. And he just destroys everything. His debuffs are very strong. Speed down, defense break. He has good damage. He has good turn cycling. Good protection for the team with barriers. Yeah, he has a self-cleanse. He has a self-CR push. Just a very, very loaded kit for PvE. He can be used in PvP, but yeah, for the most part, you're probably going to be building him for PvE stuff. Alright, so moving on here, we get through your hunt little missions when you're first starting the game and you're trying to build hunt teams. They give you Sigrid, they give you Vivian, and they give you Sirmia. Sigrid allows you to help clear Wyvern. You can one-shot with Sigrid, you can build slower teams with Sigrid, it all works quite well. For Banshee, you have Vivian, she gives immunity, she gives attack buff, she has good damage, she has AoEs to clear the trash mobs at the start of the match. She's a very good versatile unit and used in other PvE content as well, but namely you're probably going to be putting her on a Banshee team if you're just starting out. Sirmia is also really, really strong as a standalone unit, a nuke that's used for various PvE content, even in expeditions, right? But you can also use her in Golem, and by completing the Golem missions, you do get a free copy of Sirmia. Now, through your connections, you'll also be able to get units like Bomb Model Kana. She's very strong in healing, if you have Bloodstone, for example, and she's used in Earth expeditions. She's one of the best units for that expedition. And you can probably use her in other PvE content as well, but I mostly namely just use her there. And she also works as a 5-star, by the way, which is pretty cool. You don't have to promote her to 6-star. Next up, we have Yuna. She's got a little bit of a balance change a few weeks ago, so I don't really know exactly how good she is or where she's really viable. She hasn't really been viable for a while. Some people who are fanatics about her use her in PvP. She has had a bit of PvE usage in the past, but not something entirely notable. You do get her for free, though. Xeno, we don't really talk about Xeno. You get him from doing arena and stuff, and you can buy it. I think you can buy imprints of him through like Holo Trials or something of the sort. But yeah, no one really uses Xeno ever. Okay, so moving on here, we have the limited units. Now, if for any reason you're able to get limited units, right? Let's say they come out with a pack in the future and you buy the pack and there's a limited unit selector, right? Then this is probably going to be pretty beneficial for you. If you're just starting out, the #1 best limited unit to get is Laia. In fact, the #1 limited unit to get for any player is Laia. If you don't have her, you need her. Super strong in PvP, pretty much used across the board, even in high tier Emperor and Legend matches in RTA, useful in Arena, useful in Guild Wars, useful for pretty much all sorts of content. You can even use her in PvE as well in certain situations, right? Laia is so strong. Next up, we have Ocean Breeze Luluka. So Ocean Breeze Luluka here is a very strong cleanser. Yeah, she's kind of iffy into things like ML Politis. You know, those are the Moonlights. We're not getting into those. We're just sticking to RGBs today. But Ocean Breeze Luluka, ever since ML Politis came out, it's kind of struggled a little bit. If you pre-ban her in RTA, Ocean Breeze Luluka, very strong. Still really good overall in arenas and guild wars where you can control what teams you bring her into. Good cleansing, good sustain, good healing, and turn cycling for the team. She's not bad at all. Next up, we have one of the most hated units of mine, Midnight Galililius. If you want to invalidate any knight on your opponent's team, besides Empyrean Ilanov, then you can just one-shot pretty much all of them with Midnight Galililius. She's incredibly strong, incredibly easy to build because you don't need crit chance on her. She is very versatile in how you build her. You can build her high resist, super high speed. You can build her really high damage while also maintaining like the 250, 260 speed range. She's really good, right? Very, very solid. You can also, by the way, use her in PvE content, such as in Nightmare Raid. I do have her in my team to kill Juleave Council, the little bee boss that's in there. She's very good for that. Speaking of which, Landy, also a really, really strong unit overall for limiteds, right? When it comes to her limited units, she's really good overall in PvE content right now. She's pretty good because she actually doesn't allow your opponents to counter. She can be running Bloodstone. You can heal your team. Good turn cycling, speed buff for the team, CR pushing for the team. Pretty solid unit overall. She's kind of fallen off from grace in PvP. It's kind of hard to use her because there's so much AoE damage and you can't keep her stealth with Guiding Light. But yeah, in PvE content, she is still really strong. You can still use her in PvP content, stuff like arenas and guild wars and stuff. You just gotta be careful what you bring her into. She's still really good into very tanky and defensive teams, so do keep that in mind. Next up, we have Seaside Bellona. Seaside Bellona is a unit that's kind of withstood the test of time somehow. She keeps getting repurposed for various things. She's actually really good. In fact, I'd probably prioritize her over Landy, honestly, because Seaside Bellona here allows you to clear PvE content like Wyvern. You can set up one-shot teams and stuff with her. She's really solid overall. I think you can also use her in other hunts as well. I believe there's some KD's teams and stuff that can potentially use her. She can be used in Abyss. She can be used in expeditions and stuff too sometimes, right? She has a lot of uses. You can also use her in PvP. Some people build her on lifesteal and stuff. Destruction if you just want to do really high amounts of damage. Pretty good because fire units are pretty good right now in RTA, so she is a pretty decent counter pick if you pick her late. Same thing with Lethe here. Lethe was another limited unit. So Lethe can be picked late in draft in RTA. You can nuke down fire units. Her weakness is injury units, right? You don't want to get hit by injury when you're using Lethe, so do keep that in mind. She's probably still one of the best units to use in Guild Wars, a much faster version of Dark Corvus, which is an ML5. So Lethe is really strong. She has Extinction in her kit as well, self-healing, and a bunch of good debuffs as well in her kit. Next up, we have Diene. Diene is a unit that's kind of fallen from use in PvP. She might see some usage like later as we see tankier teams start to arise. She has an anti-crit buff, she has an attack buff, she has cleansing, she has barriers, right? And if you give her certain artifacts, she can start healing the team as well. So very versatile, very fast turn cycling, and very good buff uptime for your units, right? So she's pretty decent too. Next up, we have Bibulus, pretty much solely used to destroy counter units. So if you're facing a lot of counter units in Guild Wars, in arenas, she can definitely dismantle those teams. If your opponent counters you, you basically counterattack them with a defense break for the AoE onto the entire team, and then you can probably just destroy everything from there. But yeah, Bibula is pretty strong. You can also use her in Nightmare Raid. So in the Nightmare Labyrinth, I do use her against the Queen. She's very, very strong there because the Queen has a ton of counterattacks. Next up, we have Festive Ida. Festive Ida, probably not going to be for newer players to want to get. She is a very strong PvP unit, and she's quite niche and situational, but she is very, very strong in her own regard. Good debuffs, good control on the opponent, and good turn cycling with her Soulburn to take extra turns. But again, if you're a newer player, probably stray towards the first few units up here and not these down here. Next up, we got Luna, fan favorite, because of course we got ML Luna. But yeah, Luna, if you've been playing, like if you're an existing player and you played when ML Luna came out, you got a free copy of Luna there, so you probably don't want to be snagging her anytime soon. But if you're a newer player, you love Luna's design, you could go for her. She is pretty cool, and you can use her in certain PvE content like expeditions. Some people do go out of their way to use her in PvP. There are better options in PvP, but she's not terrible. Right, we got Holiday Euphine as well. Holiday Euphine kind of reminds me of a more inconsistent version of Fire Lilius. They kind of do the same job in that they cleanse the team with a attack skill, not a non-attack skill, right? So non-attack skills have a lot of counters currently in the meta, but Holiday Euphine and Fire Lilius can cleanse without attacking, or sorry, without using a non-attack skills. They do attack. Holiday Euphine has the advantage of pushing up your team while cleansing debuffs, so she is pretty useful for gaining some tempo, right? And her attacks are AoE, so you could potentially hit units out of stealth. Next up, we have Summer Break Charlotte. She is a pretty decent unit overall. Some people build her to go with aggro and cleave teams. Some people build her slower to use in more standard and bruisery teams. Her uses have kind of dwindled, especially since ML Ludwig has been on the scene, pretty much taking the spotlight from any other cleave unit besides Jacko, right? So Sunbreak Charlotte, kind of not the best option to go for, but if you like her, go for it. Next up, we have Ahmed. Ahmed is a good setup for aggro and cleave players. Ahmed Cleave was like a whole thing a few seasons back, and she was really good. Fire Politis does completely dumpster on her. So does Abyssal Euphine because they prevent CR pushing. But yeah, you can still make Ahmed work though. She just needs quite a bit of investment for the entire team comp. Next up, we have Cerise, we have Fairy Tale Tenebria, and we have Summertime Assyria. These are all really strong debuffers here. So Cerise is an opener, really slow base speed though, that's why she kind of fell from PvP. Fairy Tale Tenebria, same thing, really strong debuffer, but low base speed, so kind of fell from PvP. Both of these units are like not really all too useful, especially for newer players. Cerise could actually be okay for certain PvE content because she does dual attack. You can use her in the Light Expedition, for example, so that's a good use case there. Fairy Tale Tenebria, you could build her for Wyvern one-shots and stuff, but Seaside Bellona is just better and more efficient. Fairy Tale Tenebria needs way too much investment. Trust me, I use her in my one-shot team, so it's not the greatest. But yeah, both these units. Fairy Tale Tenebria, you can see in RTA sometimes people will use her to kind of control the opponent. But moving on here, we have Summertime Assyria. Good bridge unit for cleave and aggro teams. Good for controlling the opponent with bombs, getting some stuns out. Not terrible, but again, overshadowed by other bridge units like ML Ludwig and Jacko, who are just a bit more efficient at killing the opponents. Last but not least, we have Blooming Lidica for our limited units. She is actually fairly good in certain situations at one-shotting slower units. She needs a lot of team support, a lot of setup. Honestly, I don't think she is really good overall. She is, again, you have to use her in very specific teams under very specific conditions, and she can work. But with a long cooldown on her S3 to kill, and with an over-reliance on on her teammates to set up for her, she just kind of struggles a little bit in that regard. But yeah, overall, if you're a new player, probably not wanting to pick Blooming Lidica if you have like a limited selection, but those are all the limited units that are currently in the game. Frida, again, is also limited, but she's also just guaranteed to be unavailable, so that's why she's down there. All right, moving on to the actual RGB selectors. What can you choose, right? These are things that you shouldn't or don't have the ability to choose. What should you choose? You should choose Rowana. Rowana is a unit that has withstood the test of time in this game, right? She is so strong, and you definitely want to have a copy of her. She's used in Arena, she's used in Guild Wars, she's used in RTA occasionally, right, as counter picks against extra attacks, dual attacks, counter attacks. She's used in a lot of PvE content too. You can use her in the Ice Expedition, for example, use her in Katie's. You can use her in various sorts of Abyss content as well, especially if there's a lot of extra attacks and stuff. You get a lot of healing and CR pushing from her. You can use her in Nightmare Labyrinth. You can use her pretty much anywhere, right? And she will have a use. She doesn't require good gear to use either, which is very nice, especially if you're starting out as a newer player. But Rowana is pretty much a must pick up. Okay, next up we have Assyria. Assyria, hey, she used to be up here with Tamarin, but now that everyone's getting Tamarin for free, Assyria is here. Assyria is still a must-own unit, works really well with Tamarin across multiple forms of content. Again, expeditions, Nightmare Labyrinths. You can use her in expeditions, hunts. You can use her in Abyss. She's really strong overall. Guild Wars as well, you can make some pretty funny teams by resetting certain units like Dark Corvus, right, so that he can keep using his S3 over and over again. You can use her with Laia, for example. It's really good. So yeah, Assyria, pretty much a must-have for your account. Everyone that has, you can ask anybody who plays the game, Rwanda, Assyria, pretty much there. Now the last unit I'm going to put in the must-own category and put little asterisks above him is Immortal Wukong. So the Immortal Wukong here is a must-own currently for Rift. If you don't have Wukong, you can still do Rift. It's just really difficult because you have to have, it becomes a unit check, right? You have to have 4 specific units or like very similar units, and you need to concoct a team that can actually work. Wukong is built for Rift, or you could say Rift this season was made for Wukong, and he pretty much allows you to farm the Rift solo, right? So very, very strong unit. You can also use him in PvP content. I think his value is rising in PvP, but we'll have to see when the new season of RTA starts. I think he's pretty good with his damage scaling, with his difference in attack for his S3. He's self-attack buffs, he has AoE on his S1, pretty good overall. Right, anti-crit and defense pen resistance in his kit as well. So yeah, he's only up here though for the next few months. I don't know when the Rift season's going to end, but when it does, his usage will probably drop down to something like PvP or PvE and PvP, right? But for now, he's up there. Okay, but I'm keeping the must-own list a bit small. I don't want to overcrowd this because you don't have that many selectors, right? So if you're a newer player, concentrate your selectors on these units, and then the others you can fill in based on what you need or what you don't get from your regular 5-star books, right? Again, try to summon with your 5-star books first before using selectors. That way you can use selectors to fill in the blanks that you get instead of maybe potentially getting a dupe of a unit. Alright, next up we have the PvP and PvE units. I made this category so that we can cover some units that will see value early game, mid game, and late game, right? You can use them across various content. So first off, Fire Ravi, really strong in PvP. You guys know, you watch my RTA videos. I've been using her all season, and she's climbed me up to the top 2,000 players in the world, right? So she's very, very good, solid unit overall. Now, she's also really strong in PvE content. You can use her in Adventure, you can use her to pretty much bully your way through a ton of content in Abyss as well. She's very strong. But yeah, overall, really good unit, self-sustaining, doesn't need too much good gear to work either. Next up, we have Arya. Arya is surprisingly good in PvP and in PvE. For PvE, I think most of her usage is probably concentrated to stuff in Abyss. It's been a while since I've done it, but Arya can clear Abyss stages pretty easily with her counterattack, and she's just a very solid unit in Guild Wars and arenas in RTA as well. So yeah, if you like Arya's design, if you like Arya and you want utility, she's probably going to be really good for you. Next up, we have Destina. Destina here is also a PvP PvE unit. Now, she's kind of fallen off in the PvP scene because Blood Moon Haste exists and he's just better at that job of healing. But Destina, she does have a revive in her kit. She has a CR push and a cleanse on her S2 as well. She has healing on her S1. She is pretty much the best healer in the game, aside from Blood Moon Haste being Blood Moon Haste. But Destina here can carry you in PvE content as well. So I use her in Nightmare Labyrinth, for example. You can use her in Abyss. You can use her in PvE content like Guild Wars and stuff, right? You can definitely do it there too. She's a pretty good fail-safe team, especially with stuff like Arya. Destina with Arya with Specially Changed Christie, for example, is a very popular Guild War offense team, so you can definitely get use out of her even outside of PvE. Next up, we have Fire Lilius, one of the best dual attackers in the game because she also provides cleansing for the team. She's pretty good damage overall. Her S3 deals damage, pushes people back too. And yeah, she's useful in Nightmare Labyrinth. For example, I use her there. You could potentially use her in stuff like Expeditions. If you don't have Fire Cecilia, you might be able to use her in like the Earth Expedition. I think A-Raz might be better though, but you know, you can test her out. Fire Lily is also really good overall for fighting things like Lua. If you find her in Guild War defense teams and stuff, you can definitely equip her with Mort's artifact, the Ancient Dragon's Legacy, to help out your team to not get their cooldowns reset by Lua. She's pretty versatile there. Some people do use her in RTA, in PvP. So you do see the Epic Several Championship, actually, quite a few people did draft Lilius a couple times against Lua. Really versatile unit, right? Lilius is pretty strong. Next up, we have Euphine. So Euphine here is PvP, PvE. She's really mostly a PvE unit now, but you can technically use her in PvP, especially if you have Zeo. She pretty much only really works with Zeo because she requires the opponent to be silenced for her to cut and get her buffs and stuff. But yeah, Euphine can be used in PvE. I use her, for example, as a Banshee one-shotter. You can use her in Labyrinth. So in Labyrinth, you can actually have this like immortal counter Euphine that you can use to farm a bunch of ancient coins. So every week or so, you can pretty much use any leftover entries into the Labyrinth, and you can farm a bunch of tokens there that way. But it is unit specific. You need Euphine, you need Shooting Star Arcades, right? So if you don't have Shooting Star Arcades, you might not be able to do that. She's still pretty decent though overall, and not a terrible pickup. Although again, her usage, her viability in PvP, really not that much. She's mostly a PvE unit, but you could make her work. Okay, next up, pretty much exclusively PvP units that you could technically still use in PvE, but they're very strong for PvP, and they're pretty much made for that purpose. The first thing is Knockwall. If you're getting into PvP and you have a 5-star selector, get Knockwall, because Knockwall is very oppressive. She has a seal, she has a bind, she's going to make it so your opponents can't counterattack, they don't have access to their passives. She has good turn cycling, takes extra turns, right? You can seal one unit every other turn, so it is pretty nice. Against slower teams, she pretty much demolishes them. She also silences with her S1 and pushes the units back. She's a very versatile unit in PvP. You can use her against slow teams, you can use her against faster teams. She's just really great. You can also, because she's a ranger, you can run her on Guiding Light, and if your opponents have something like Zeo that's opening, they can't hit her either. So yeah, Knockwall, pretty solid. Pretty solid. All right, next up we have Genoa. Genoa is a very powerful unit. Probably the best DPS, like straight up just DPS damage output unit in the game right now. Very good at slicing through people's defenses, and as long as you're not fighting an ice unit, but let's be honest, even if you're fighting an ice unit, you have 50-50 shot of one-shotting them. So yeah, Genoa is very powerful. Used in RTA, using Arena offense, Guild War offense. You just use him pretty much anywhere against any team that's tanky. You can just cut through them like butter, right? Next up, we have Fire Politis. Really strong and versatile unit, can be built fast and high damage for aggro and cleave teams. You can build her slower and tankier on counter set. She prevents the opponent from cutting by cutting their combat readiness gain in half. She works really well with Ron in cleave teams, but she also works really well as an anti-cleave unit to prevent your opponent from using non-attack skills, because she will do an extra attack. She'll kind of do a little proc on her S2 whenever your opponent does that. And if you're running her on Abyssal Crown and stuff, she has a chance to stun your opponent too, while also stripping some buffs. Next up, we have Celine. Celine has been used so much this season. She's pretty much seen everywhere, from the low ranks of RTA all the way to the upper echelons of Emperor and Legend. She is a staple in PvP right now, really punishing against non-attack skill units. Her stealth keeps her alive. You can build her on full damage if you'd like. You can build her tankier if you'd like. But overall, quite good. You can build on various sets too, destruction set or speed set, so she has some flexibility there as well. All right, next up we have some openers. We got Ron, still one of the best openers in the entire game. Fastest base speed unit, tied with Kayron, but Kayron's never built on speed. Ron pretty much never gets outsped unless it's against the Zeo, who pretty much guarantees to take the first turn. But Ron here has an AoE defense break and soul burn to ignore resistance. You have a stigma debuff, prevents cuts healing and combat readiness gains in half. He has a team-wide immunity buff, and you can run him on various different artifacts like RNL to take extra turns, or silver silver blade or whatever it is that allows you to buff another teammate with attack. So yeah, Ron is super solid, right? Overall, probably one of the best units in the entire game for fast players. Peyra, also a pretty decent unit in PvP, kind of fallen off a little bit towards the end of the season, but yeah, she's really strong against units like Emma Politis, Blood Moon Haste. So if you're playing, even if you're playing a slower playstyle, having really good speed gear on Peyra allows you to counter some of those picks. Unbuffable is one of the best debuffs right now in the current meta, and Peyra has that as an AoE hit on her S2 in her kit, so she is very solid there. She also decreases buff durations by a turn when she S2s. She also gives a team-wide attack buff, and she provides herself a barrier and grants herself an escort buff, mitigating damage for your team. So she's very useful and very versatile with what you can bring her into. Next up, we have Pavel, really good aggro, cleave, damage dealer, PvP unit. If you're not playing a fast team, don't go for Pavel, right? Lua, also a really strong debuffer, honestly almost as obnoxious as Knockwall in this case, but Lua has non-attack skills to reset your opponent's skill cooldowns, just like Knockwall does, but Knockwall actually has to land the hit. Lua doesn't. You can soul burn just like Knockwall can to ignore resistance to get that effect if you would like. Her S2 strips buffs and puts a unit to sleep, and her S1 has a 2-turn defense break for some odd reason. Usually everyone's defense breaks is a 1-turn debuff duration, but she has a 2-turn debuff duration. Don't know why. Anyway, command model like as the next unit here, not as good as Ron or Peyra, right, as openers, not even close to stuff like Knockwall and Lua, but she is still used in PvP. She is a pretty decent opener in some cases for some aggro teams. She does have a target down debuff and a dual attack with her S2, which can be useful at times if you just need another strong unit who's already taken their turn to attack again. Right, next up we have Flan, another unit that sets up for aggro and cleave. Now keep in mind there is a limited Flan that's coming out. That's not the same as this if you're a new player, right? This is not the limited Flan that's going to be coming out in several weeks, but yeah, she's still really strong, right? Regular Flan. Again, if you're not playing fast teams, there's no real point in getting her unless you just like her design, but she has an AoE defense break that's a non-attack skill. She can also soul burn that to take an extra turn. You'd S2 and push up a unit on your side, give them attack and crit damage buff, and you pretty much end your opponent's entire career. Alright, next up we have Bihu. I put Bihu up here in PvP. He's not really used all too much in PvE, right? You can potentially use him in some forms of content, I believe, but he's really strong in PvP because he has an unbuffable. He has burns that can detonate. You can actually use him to counteract quite a few annoying units in the meta. You can use burns to actually bypass anti-crit, so you can kill units like ML Landy pretty easily, who is one of the best DPS units in the game right now. So Bihu is a pretty good counterpick to certain units. You can use him into Blood Moon Haste and stuff as well, because again, unbuffable is really good. And burns can actually one-shot a lot of squishier units as well, especially if you build them with a bit higher attack than usual. Right, next up we have Ida. Ida is a good bridge unit, so if you're using Ron, Peyra, right, these types of units that have non-attack skills, Ida is really good. Every time you use a non-attack skill, she pushes up her combat readiness. She usually takes a turn after your opener, and then her S3 actually pushes up your entire team, so you can keep turn cycling some more. She's really strong, and she has a stun in her kit as well, right? Next up, we have Elagos. Elagos, again, is for these aggro cleave teams, so if you have Ron, Peyra, and Shenanigans, and you, let's say, damage somebody down super low, you can have Elagos come in with an extra attack, and he can come in and kill another unit on your opponent's side, which is great. Okay, next up is Araminta. Now, Araminta, she used to actually be in this Waifu Husbando category, but Araminta's kind of seen a resurgence lately in being a pretty good PvP pocket pick. She's used in RTA, not very common, but she is really good as a counter to units like A Tywin. So into A Tywin DDR teams where they don't really have too much cleansing, you can overwhelm the A Tywin who's pretty much a passive cleanser by putting a bunch of debuffs on the team, 4 or 5 debuffs, right? Because you have burns, you have unhealables, you have defense breaks, and she can actually lock down your opponent quite well. Next up, we have Elvira, locks down Fighting Spirit. Your opponent just cannot gain Fighting Spirit ever. Good in Arena, good in Guild Wars, and also obviously good as a counter pick in RTA. Very strong unit just because of that passive. Next up, we have Fumir. Fumir is again used in like kind of aggro and cleave teams. She does have a really weird kit, but when you can make it work, when she's an anchor as in she's not a really squishy unit that's used in aggro or cleave teams. She is more of a support unit that's there to survive, right? So you use her to usually build her with a bunch of effectiveness, and you can sleep the entire enemy team for 2 turns. 2-turn sleeps are really rare. I think I don't know of any unit besides Fumio that has a 2-turn sleep, but yeah, 2-turn sleeps are devastating. Your opponent loses 2 entire turns, allows your team to kind of recoup and gather themselves, and you can kind of pick off any unit you want one at a time because your opponent's pretty much defenseless. All right, next up we have Zahak. Zahak is a pretty solid damage dealer, kind of fallen off a little bit in terms of his use because, of course, Shaltir is a thing, but Shaltir is unavailable. She is a collab unit down here, right? So because she's unavailable, Zahak is actually pretty much the same unit. He doesn't really require too many resources to build in terms of his crit rate. He only has 50% crit, so not terrible. He doesn't need to be terribly fast either, but if you're having trouble against evasion units, then he is really strong there. He also has some injury in his kit, so he could be decent against HP scaling bruisers, but that's a little bit more difficult to pull off because he himself is quite squishy to take into those teams. Next up, we have Abigail. Abigail's a very good bruiser. She actually is getting a buff so that she's not as susceptible to unbuffable as she once was. She protects the backline unit. If they are going to die, she would actually give him immortality, which keeps them alive until the buff wears off, and she gives him vampirism. Vampirism allows that unit to heal back up, so you keep the unit alive. Hopefully on their next turn, they deal a bunch of damage, they heal back up to full, and then you are left in a pretty decent position, right? She's usually used in protect the tower teams, right? Squishy units and stuff can be put in the back. Units that are high priority kill targets for your opponent are usually put in the back line so she can keep them alive. They have to burst through Abigail first before they can get to them. Next up, we have Shu. Ice Shu is a very strong PvP unit. She actually can be PvP PvE. You can put her up here as well. So she's a quite versatile unit as well. She has anti-crit buff for the entire team. She can buff herself with immunity. She has counterattacks. If she crits on her S1, she has a 40% chance to hit with her S2. And her S2 does give some healing as well as penetrate defense. So very versatile unit and very, very good overall. Next up, we have Alencia. Alencia is going to be getting a buff in a couple weeks. Now, it's best to probably wait and see what she looks like after that buff, but on paper, her buff looks really solid. It looks like she's going to have a lot more utility, a lot more ability to team support, and a greater amount of injury that can be applied. She's just made more consistent, right? She has a lot of base stats that are going to be increased, 20% free crit rate and stuff. So she's going to be looking pretty good. I think wait and see if you're interested in Alencia, wait and see how she does in actual PvP content like RTA before you pick her up. Next up, we have the Great Mortelix. Probably going to be a worse Alencia after Alencia gets her buff, honestly. But Mort does have the ability to buff the team with an anti-crit buff, much like DN, but DN is limited. And he also has Ignore Res Defense Break. He also has Injury in his kit and some self-healing. He is honestly a pretty loaded unit, but for some reason just like kind of a jack of all trades, a master of none. He kind of falls short a little bit compared to a lot of other units out there. But yeah, Mort is definitely used pretty much exclusively for PvP. Next up, we have Arunka. Arunka is not the greatest unit, honestly, but she doesn't crit, and you can actually use her against some pretty annoying team comps in Guild Wars. If you see Arwell with Spirit Eye Celine, for example, a common team is Arwell, Spirit Eye Celine, and Savior Aiden. So all those units would get a barrier from the Arwell, and Arunka does a ton of damage if opponent has a barrier. Her S3 carries Extinction. It does, it resets itself if you kill somebody. So pretty much if your opponents put up barriers, you can kill with your S3, and then those units cannot come back. It's pretty easy to kill with her, especially if you have an attack buffer on your side, but yeah, she does need a bit of help, so do keep that in mind. Not the greatest unit, not the most applicable unit, but a very beautiful design nonetheless. Alright, moving on here, we got Violet. Very good against ice units, but ice is right now not in the greatest spot in RTA. I'd say fire is probably one of the best elements right now, currently. Mostly thanks to things like Knockwall and Genoa and things, and Fire Politis, right? Those top 3 that we put up here. So, Violet, not that great, but again, if you do get him, he is used in PvP. Next up, we have Kayron. Kayron's used as an anti-cleave unit most of the time these days. He has a built-in evasion once he gets his immortality procced. He has immortality in his passive, so he can't get killed. Usually build him on counter sets, so he can keep slapping the opponent back whenever they hit him. And he can't die, so you put him on really low speed. He sits there, and as long as your opponent can't ignore resistance and strip his buffs, he'll be good to go. But there are a lot of units that can ignore resistance and strip buffs, so he struggles a little bit. But yeah, anti-cleave unit here, not too shabby. Next up, we have Crow and Yolha, putting both of them here because they are used in PvP. I would say both of them need a little bit of help to kind of round out their kits a little bit. Honestly, the reason why they've kind of fallen off is because Midnight Gala Lilius is a thing, and they'd get one shot. Yolha a little less so. Midnight Gala Lilius, if you build Yolha with enough HP, Midnight Gala Lilius can't kill Yolha, and the reflect damage can actually kill Gala. But Crow definitely needs help, right? We've already seen Fire Ravi get buffed. She is really good. Right up here, we see Alencia got buffed. She's pretty good. She's up here. Crow, part of the Awaken Potential update candidate from last year before they canceled that update. So Crow is probably next in line to get a buff, and I hope he gets something good because this guy deserves it. He has been solid and consistent since the beginning of the game, and the fact that he's still holding on is very nice. All right, but yeah, Crow is right here. Honestly, probably maybe not get him if you're looking for an Ice Knight, but he is not bad, right? He's still usable in things like Guild Wars if you really need him there. He's a good ice tank. All right, next up we have Senya. So Senya is a unit that's kind of weird. She kind of got a lot of collateral damage from ML Landy existing. ML Landy also has anti-crit built into her kit. Senya has a 50% anti-crit built into her kit. Honestly, I'd like to see her get buffed to be like a 70%, to be in line with Navy Captain Landy and in line with the future Pirate Captain Flan when she gets her 70% anti-crit. Senya's whole gimmick is to not get crit. She does reflect damage to the opponent. She does counters, all right? She puts a counter stance on. So her goal is to keep provoking the opponent, have them attack her, and all that damage gets reflected back onto them. Pretty fun unit overall, but yeah, she needs a little bit of help. Kind of struggles a little bit because so many like guaranteed crit units are out there. Like new Crescent Moon Bellona, right? We have Fire Ravi. You have a lot of units that just don't care and will always crit you. Things like Fire Charlotte too, even though Fire Charlotte isn't even that good anymore. We have Elena. Elena's a fantastic PvP unit against aggro and cleave. You can use her to protect your entire team. Also can be used in standard if your opponent's using like a AoE opener, right? But most of their team is pretty tanky and slower. On the slower side, Elena is a really good unit to mitigate that AoE damage, heal your team, cleanse, and then put invincibility on for everybody. She's also one of the few units that can cleanse by using her S1. She actually cleanses 1 debuff off of 2 units on your team at random. Next up, we have Sharoon, Earth Sharoon. I know a lot of people think that she's not great. In my opinion, she's a really strong control unit. Very, very strong, in fact. But she is underutilized. So if you're not really going down that route of playing things like RTA, and you don't really want to have that, like, you're not in need of a surprise little tech in your roster, pass up on Sharoon. Not an essential unit, but I really personally do enjoy using her. She can reset skill cooldowns and stuff, right? And apply venoms, so she is pretty decent. She also has a full buff strip against your opponents. The issue is she does have to hit your opponent, so against fire units, which are pretty prominent in the meta right now, she struggles a little bit there. Next up, another Soul Weaver, we have Brigitte. Brigitte is pretty good if you're trying to lock down a single DPS unit on the opponent's side. The problem is, once she does that, she kind of doesn't really do all that much for your team. She is a little bit weird to build. You kind of want her to not get controlled, so you need some effect resistance. She needs effectiveness, though, if you want to debuff your opponent. you can soul burn to ignore the effect res, but her artifact is really difficult to use. You need to have it at plus 30, so unless you're summoning like 7 copies of it or using bottles of knowledge on it, I really don't know if it's entirely worth it. Brigitte hasn't really seen any PvP applications, honestly, but she has a PvP kit because her stuff can't be used in PvE. Yeah, she's just in a weird position. She needs to get buffed, but you can use her in like Arena and Guild Wars, just not so much in RTA. Alright, that is it for all the PvP units. Now let's move on to the PvE superstars. If you're a newer player, this is probably what you're going to be concentrating on this section here. Luluka, a really strong defense breaker, actually. Ice unit, she's a mage, she has access to a lot of good artifacts, really good in various sorts of content. Honestly, she carried me through my playthrough of the game, so from years back, even before she got like buffs and all these other things, EEs and stuff added to her kit, she was really good, right? Defense breaks out the wazoo. I used her in Katie's, I used her in against Wyvern, right? The Wyvern hunt. I've used her in expeditions against the fire boss there. I've used her in Nightmare Labyrinths. I've used her in normal labyrinths. She carried me through so much, even in Abyss and everything too, right? She's very solid. You can also use her in the Dark Expedition too, by the way. Yeah, she's just crazy in her applications. So very, very solid unit. I would almost kind of want to put her in like a must own, but I want to limit the must own to like really the 2 core units, right? I don't want to overwhelm people with decision fatigue. Yeah, so next up we have Tenebria. Tenebria, also fantastic unit, because she has an AoE defense break just like Luluka. So defense break is super strong in PvE. You want defense break everybody you can so that you can just wipe out the boss, right? It is the easiest thing to do. Tenebria also has good applications across various content, so you can use her in labyrinths, you can use her in expeditions, you can use her in some hunts as well. So she is pretty versatile there. You can probably also use her in Abyss. She has some pretty good controlling skills too. She can decrease combat readiness. She puts speed down. Not only does she defense break, but she also puts things to sleep too. You can't put bosses to sleep usually, but again, that's just part of her application, her kit, right? She's still really versatile in what she can do in controlling like trash mobs and stuff. Next up we have Bologna. She is an Earth unit, an Earth Ranger, and guess what she has on her S3? That's right, an AoE defense break, just like Luluka, just like Tenebria, but Bologna can actually carry you through a bunch of content. Very strong right now in things like Rift. You can use her there. She's also really good in hunts. You can use her in Azimanic. You can use her in potentially Katie's, I think. I never used her there, but you can use her in Banshee. She's a very staple unit in Banshee along with Vivian, right? Bologna and Vivian here together are really, really good. Bologna also has a built-in Daydream Joker in her kit, which means when she uses her S1, that damage scales based on the target's max health. So she's a really, really strong PvE machine. Yeah, and she can also turn cycle quite well too. So if you put things like Bloodstone on her, because she's a ranger, she can actually sustain your team with heals as well. Next up, we have Haste. Haste is pretty much Ron, but fire. But the reason why Haste is not used in PvP is because he doesn't have the same soul burn as Wrong, which is ignore resistance, and then you can apply defense breaks and stuff to everybody. Haste soul burn is more damage on his S2. But Haste is pretty good at healing and sustaining the team. He, again, has defense breaks, a bunch of bleeds, a lot of debuffs on his kit. He can put vampirism on the opponent as well, especially if you're using him... if you're using him in PvE content like guild in the guild Ancient Inheritance, that's what it is. If you use him in Ancient Inheritance, a very solid unit there as well. But Ancient Inheritance is a really rare event that occurs, you know, only a few times a year. But again, Haste, pretty solid. Can definitely do you some good. His S3 is an AoE defense break, right? So much like Luluka, Tenebria, and Bologna, he falls into the same category. Speaking of defense breakers, we have Fire Ken. Fire Ken is a really strong dual attacker. He can, if you have a boss or something you just want to burst down a single target unit, he will defense break with his S2 before calling a dual attack with the highest attack unit on your side. And he's really consistent damage dealer himself. right? He has good debuffs in his kit. He has burns, he has attack down, he has defense break, he gives himself vigor buff as well, so he ignores resistance too for his defense break if he has vigor buff up. So yeah, Ken's pretty solid. Speaking of more defense breaks, we have Sage, sorry, not Sage Ball and Sazan, just regular Ball and Sazan, because guess what, his S3 has a defense break. It has defense break, I believe has speed down, attack down. He is a debuffing monster. Used a lot in Earth expeditions, but aside from that, really not too much. You can use him in Ancient Inheritance as well. I definitely do. I'm using him in my current run, but yeah, some limited applications, right, for PvE. Cecilia, unfortunately, Brig exists, and Brig is going to be free. So Cecilia, she's kind of out of a job besides with Earth Expedition, right? Because Brig can't really do the Earth Expedition. You could make him work. I've seen people make him work there. But Fire Cecilia is the optimal unit of choice. But unfortunately, she's only good for that now, right? In Dark Expeditions and Light Expeditions, you used to be able to use Cecilia there. But now Brig just excels and is just a way better option. So, unfortunately, Cecilia, still PvE, but just not as good as she once was. Chloe, good for Wyverns. Magic Nail, really good big damage. Boom, smack Wyvern, Wyvern dies. Not necessary to have. You could do one-shots with other units too, but Chloe, I believe, is part. You can do a 2-unit one-shot of Wyvern with Chloe, so it's pretty nice. I don't remember what the other unit is, but you can probably search it up on YouTube. Next up, we have Vildred. Vildred is actually a really strong PvE sweeper, so he's a good AoE damage dealer, right? And he does turn cycle the team quite a bit if he kills units. If a unit dies, he can actually push up as well, so he's pretty nice. So Vildred is actually used in things like Azimanic Hunts. You can use him to clear out and just travel in a adventure mode. Now, Free Spirit Tieria kind of took over the adventure mode sweeper. She is actually a very strong unit, especially after a bit of her tweaks and buffs that were added in the last 2 balance patches ago. But yeah, Vildred's still pretty decent, and he's actually a PvP unit as well, just not really seen anymore in the PvP scene. I guess you can technically put him up here, right? Vildred can be used. Kind of like Euphine. I guess if I put Euphine up there, I should put Vildred up here. In Cleave teams, he does work, right? He's an AoE damage dealer. You defense break with somebody, and then he just goes to town. All right, next up is Charles. Oh, Vildred, by the way, can also be used in Banshee. Charles can also be used in Banshee. He's actually part of the Banshee one-shot team with Vivian, and I believe it is Baiken, right? Something like that. Anyway, I don't know the exact team. There's so many variations to the Banshee one-shot teams out there, but Charles is a very strong unit in that regard. Mostly used in PvP now. I wish he was back in PvP. He used to be one of the PvP kings back when the first game first released in like year 1. But yeah, Charles now relegated to hunting Banshees apparently. Next up, we have Charlotte. Charlotte is a unit that is in the Waifus and Husbandos category, unfortunately. She is overshadowed by things like Fire Ravi. Fire Ravi is just a better option. Charlotte does do AoEs and she guarantees crits, but she doesn't do enough damage. Ravi just does way more. And Ravi has an S3 that's also AoE. Eventually you'll charge it up and you'll throw your axe, and Charlotte just really can't keep up and compete, unfortunately. But if you like her, you'll like her. Hua Young, not really that great right now, honestly, with defense penetration kind of making its way out with Empyrean Ilanov. Hua Young, she just doesn't really cut it. Minega Lilius is a way better version of her, and even when Hua Young was in her prime, honestly, before she was nerfed, like Minega Lilius is honestly probably right now still better than Hua in her prime. She's just a kind of not good enough right now, right? She just lacks too much, not able to survive long enough. She's a bit squishy, right? Sometimes struggles to kill, right? The tanks. She's really good as like a killer for mid HP units, like, you know, the Soul Weavers that are like 16 to 18, maybe 20k health. She can one-shot those units, but everybody else, don't even think about it. Alright, next up we have Ilinov. Unfortunately, she's just not that great right now. I bet Alencia, after her buff, is probably going to be better than Ilinov as an injury applicator. And that's the Ilinov's entire shtick, right, is being an injury detonator. So she needs a bit of help with her kit. She hopefully will get some balance to her in the future. But yeah, injury, I think, is something that Smilegate doesn't want to overwhelm players with. Too many injury units is bad because there's no counter to injury right now in the game. Kane, we don't talk about Kane. He was the last unit that was used for Rift. I didn't even summon for Kane, and I cleared that Rift. So if you're, but Wukong's like tailor-made for this current one. So the Rift currently, Wukong can solo that. They made it super easy. Kane, unfortunately, doesn't really do all that much, so not really worth picking up. Same with Melissa. She's gotten like 5 or 6 balance patches in the past. Pretty much the only unit that rivals her is like Ravi's, the Fire Ravi and like APOC Ravi and like Judge Kisei. But Melissa here just doesn't cut it. She doesn't really do all that much, honestly. Next up is Lidica, really fast base speed unit, only 10 souls to soul burn, ignore res, and strip buffs from the opponent, but she's too inconsistent. Her S3 has like 3 15% checks, so she's not really great. Yeah, unfortunately, I really wish she was. Lidica's one of my favorite characters, so probably not worth picking up. Calric and Kisei I'll put in the same boat. Both are basically supposed to be speed DPS units, but because they have pretty much 0 survivability, right, nowadays with fast units like Midnight God Lilius, you have a limit, damage limit buff. With Straze, you have invincibility. Watcher Shuri, you have like a skill nullifier. You have something to keep you alive. Calric and Kisei just don't, so you're probably not outspeeding anything anyway with them, even if you put your best gear on them. So you can put your best gear on them, get outsped by Ron, and still die, right? They're just not really viable right now. Next up is Sez. He does have some survivability. I don't think he's that great of a unit right now still. He's still a little too gimmicky. I feel like they need to streamline him a bit more for him to be more viable. But yeah, overall, if you like his design, go for it. But Specimen Sez kind of does his job, but a bit better as a nuke. Next up, we have Teiyu. Everyone keeps wanting Teiyu to be good, but Smilegate just doesn't seem to be able to make him good. Even with the rage buff that ML Politis gives to the team, Teiyu still just falls short, unfortunately. Next up, we have Ice Tywin. Between him and Crow, I'd still probably say Crow is a little bit better. Ice Tywin just needs to be able to cleanse, sleep, and stun on the backline unit when it's a non-attack skill. Anytime the unit in the backline is stunned or slept, he should be able to cleanse them off, right? But right now, he can only cleanse, stun, and sleep if the backline unit is attacked while they are stunned and slept, which is kind of weird because it defeats the purpose of having that in his kit, right? Anyway, we have Ray. So Ray he was actually okay for stuff like Rift, but Wukong, after a certain point, Wukong can solo Rift, so Ray isn't really that necessary. They also released a 3-star unit, I believe his name's like Bennett or something like that, and he actually does the job way better than Ray. He's actually optimal for the Rift, right, whereas Ray is not. Next up we have Basar. He's kind of still, like, his main thing is his low base speed. He does have an ignore res, 30% CR pushback against the opponent's team, although it does need to hit, but again, fire units in the meta, so kind of struggles there. He does have unbuffable though, so if you're against things like, Blood Moon Haste and shenanigans, he could actually still do some work. But again, his base speed is really low. You're probably just going to die before he can do anything, unfortunately. Next up, we have Irvelin. Irvelin's pretty much a damage dealer to try to one-shot something, and well, he doesn't really do that all too well in PvP because he's a bit squishy, no survivability. Remember what we said about that with Kisei and Calric. And in PvE, he's just overshadowed by other one-shot units. Like, if you have Baiken and stuff, you can probably more easily one-shot Banshee. Same with Yufine, you can easily one-shot Banshee there. He can be used in Banshee to one-shot, but you do need to keep in mind he needs a more specific team comp, I believe, to work, or at least more specific gear. Lilibet, also a high damage earth unit, and again, that's really all she has to offer. She has Extinction in her kit, she has some turn cycle with her S2, but still suboptimal compared to other units. She has insane damage scaling with her Soul Burn on her S3, but if you're a damage dealer and you don't have survivability, like I mentioned earlier, you're probably not doing too well. Ludwig. Very good cleave unit, actually. Very good cleave unit. But he does require a little bit too much to set up. Ideally, he gets invincibility, and then he can cleave, right? He deals more damage if he has invincibility on him. It's a very specific buff. He can give it to himself, which is nice, and there are more units now that can give invincibility to the team. It's just that his ML version's a bit better, so that's why he's not really all that great. But you could use him, if you want to use him, PvP. Last but not least, we have Mui. Mui is here because she's kind of low base speed, overshadowed by other openers, and she doesn't really bring much to the table, honestly. She like full team attack buffs and stuff, but why would you need her when you have Para, right? And Mui, she does have the ability to put enhanced dual attack on somebody, but even then, it's just not enough. Why would you do that when you can Para, debuff your opponent's units, push up somebody with your with like a Jacko, right? Jacko or somebody can push themselves up, act as a bridge unit, and then you just kill your opponent. So she struggles in that regard. But yeah, anyway, that is the entire tier list here, guys. Let me know what you think of this in the comments section down below. I'm going to go ahead and activate the name so that now anyone, if you need to reference this list really fast, you can come to the end of the video, and then you can see all of the units, where they are, and what their names are. So with that being said though, guys, thank you all so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe for more Epic 7 content. And until next time, take care.